But welcome everyone. My name is Becca Tamel, and I am the Education and Outreach Coordinator at the Chapman Museum, and I'm welcoming you to another Conversations with the Past. So before we get started, if you haven't already, if you could just mute your microphones, we would appreciate that. I'm going to be muting myself in just a bit. We'd also like to thank North Country Subaru for their sponsorship of tonight's online program. It's because of their sponsorship that tonight's program is free for all. And additionally, the cost of producing our programs is offset by memberships. So if you like what you see tonight, and you are not already a member, please consider becoming one. You can get more information on membership by visiting chapmanmuseum.org. And now we'll get into who our speaker is for tonight. So our speaker tonight is Dr. Hadley Kruczek-Aaron. Hadley is a proud mom, teacher, and anthropological archaeologist whose research examines the ways that class, gender, race, and religion have been lived in 19th century America. She explored these topics in her 2015 book, Everyday Religion, An Archaeology of Protestant Belief and Practice in the 19th Century. And this book focused on archaeology carried out at sites associated with Central New York abolitionist Gerrit Smith. Since then, she's continued to explore similar questions at sites across Northern New York, including those associated with Civil War soldiers, loggers, reformers, tourists, and farmers, and especially those associated with Timbuctoo, a 19th century community of African Americans in the Adirondacks, which is also the subject of tonight's presentation. Hadley earned her PhD from Syracuse University and has been a professor at SUNY Potsdam since 2005. One last note, if you have questions for Hadley, I'm sure she'd be happy to take them. If you wouldn't mind just typing them in the chat, what I'll do at the end is I'll just read them aloud and she will answer them to the best of her ability. And without further ado, I will hand it over to Dr. Kruczek-Aaron for her talk, Return to Timbuctoo.
All right, thank you so much, Becca. I really appreciate the invitation to come back. I think if you count the documentary that you showed of searching for Timbuctoo a couple of years ago, and then I have given a talk since then. This is my third time visiting with you all, and so it's always lovely to be here and to be with the Chapman Museum folks, and I really appreciate the opportunity to continue and sharing what the research has been all about most recently. And so as Becca was saying, I am talking tonight about the recent research that I've done associated with the Timbuctoo Archaeology Project. And so today you're going to hear from me about a little bit on the history of the project, but mostly to give you some context about the Timbuctoo community, and then to give you a little bit of a sense of what our goals have been with the archaeology, and then to focus more specifically about the recent work that we've done. Last year, we were in the field, and then in 2022, we were in the field at the same location. And so you're going to be hearing mostly about the work that we've been doing over the last two field seasons, and what some of the takeaways are from those recent field seasons. Before we get too far, though, one of the things that I learned early in my career that I always have to remind myself about is that I was giving a talk many moons ago on Timbuctoo, actually. And I gave the talk and I came to the end and somebody raised their hands, it was like at the end of the Q&A, and they said to me, "But why should this matter? Why do this kind of work?" And I thought, oh my God, I just came through this talk and we didn't go over the why. And so I learned from that moment on how important the why is. And so I thought I would start with the why tonight, and to give you a sense of, why I think this work is important, or why this work is important for us to think about today. And maybe these are things that you also think about and what brought you to come to this talk today, but maybe not. And so it'll give you a little bit more food for thought. And so in order for me to get at the why, a couple of weeks ago, actually, this is a news story that came out in the Adirondack Explorer and other venues across the North Country. I saw this news story about this effort to rename this local mountain that's in the Westport Preserve that's actually on land owned by the Adirondack Land Trust. And as you can see, this mountain is named Coon Mountain. And so the Adirondack Land Trust began the process of going about trying to change this name because the reference in the mountain name made people had expressed concern about the name because of its association with race and as a racist pejorative term. And so they were going to change it to Blue Mountain. And I saw the story that was about this name change. And I did what people say not to do. And that is I read the comments. And everybody always says, don't read the comments. And so I read the comments. And in those comments, I saw some opinions and observations that made me realize, and again, kind of connected to the work that I'm doing. And I just want to share a couple of the comments. You can see here by this news story in the Explorer that Essex County supervisors are speaking out against renaming Coon Mountain. And it has generated a backlash to this effort. And some of the comments were things like this. This is going to give you a sense of the flavor. Anybody objecting to the current name are not locals. And you have other comments that are saying things like, why are these people from the land trust coming in and renaming this? These people are outsiders. I've been living here for years. This is what the name of the mountain is, and what gives them the right to change the name. And another commenter said this is a direct quote, leave our history alone. Okay. And so, this, I think, prompts questions, important questions about how history is viewed and how the Adirondacks are viewed, right? I think some of the controversy over this renaming relate to some of the questions that are on the screen right now. That is, who is considered an Adirondacker, right? Who can claim this label, right? What does it mean to be, whose stories are a part of our history, right? Who gets to decide about whose stories are told, right? And what happens when these narratives are broadened so that we have stories that allow for what we mean by Adirondack or Adirondack history to be more comprehensive, to be more complete, right? What happens when narratives that are not ordinarily a part of our public memory are included in the public memory? What happens to our perception of what our history is and what labels like Adirondack are? And I would say by extension, we could think of the term American and what does it mean to be American and whose stories are a part of our narratives of American history, especially as we're coming up on the 250th birthday of this nation. And so I think these questions are really important about who we think we are and the narratives that we've told ourselves and about this landscape that we are a part of. And so I raise these questions for you to consider. And maybe at the end of the talk, we can have a conversation about these kinds of questions and the impact that broadening the narratives has on people's perceptions of what our history is. So I'll leave that as the kind of appetizer to whet your appetite of the why here, of why do this kind of work. So I hope that resolves that. I'm going to start the research portion of the talk by doing a little bit of time travel for us. That I usually tell my students that archaeology is the closest thing to time travel that there is. And so in that vein, in celebrating that kind of idea here, I'm going to take us on a little bit of a time travel journey here and take us back to 1846. And we're in Troy, New York, this new industrial center that is home to a small but vibrant Black community that includes a mix of free Black New Yorkers, those who had been born free, those who had been born enslaved, freedom seekers, and free people who had come to Troy and New York from elsewhere looking for economic opportunity in some of the industries that Troy came to be known for. Included among them was this gentleman, Lyman Epps, who had taken a few steps before he came to Troy in 1846, but we find him here in 1846 thanks to the city directories of Troy that confirm for me that he's here. He had come from Connecticut. He is the son of a native father, a Pequot father, and an enslaved African-American woman named Candace. And he's born in Colchester, Connecticut. He's one of several children. And he eventually finds his way to New York City. We kind of follow the paper trail for some of these major life events, and that he's in New York City. He marries his wife, Anna Miller, and she's from Brooklyn. They eventually find their way to Westchester, where they give birth to their oldest daughter. And eventually, by 1846, they are there together with their daughter, living not too far away from the Liberty Street Presbyterian Church, which is pictured here. And this is the major African-American church at this time in Troy, New York. And I haven't confirmed that he was a parishioner of this church, but I feel 99% sure that he likely was. He was a religious man, and so I would not be surprised, given his path that he ends up taking, that he was a part of this congregation and was also active in some of the organizations that were. Some of them were based at the Liberty Street Presbyterian Church. It was a major community center for the African American community in Troy at this time. And so, given that he's a part of this community in 1846 is a major year for the Black community in Troy. And it is that for a couple of reasons. First of all, we know that it is in this year that there was a New York State Constitutional Convention where the question of Black suffrage came to be discussed and debated. At this time in New York State, if you were a Black man, you had to own $250 worth of property in New York to be able to vote. And that was not a requirement for white men in New York at this time. And so the question of whether or not this property qualification should be removed was presented by a lot of activism by some of the important leaders who were based in Troy and in the capital region and in New York City and elsewhere. Activists pushed for this question of Black suffrage, Black male suffrage, to be considered by the Constitutional Convention. And the writing on the wall of the convention at this time, over the summer of 1846, was that it was not going to be successful. And it ends up being the delegates to the convention vote overwhelmingly to keep the property qualification in place. At the same time, you have this very well-known white abolitionist. Oh, I'm sorry to say that. The script on this slide is not coming through. I'm sorry about that. This gentleman that you're seeing right here is the abolitionist Gerrit Smith, who you heard in the introduction that Becca gave of my work, is that I've spent a lot of time with Gerrit Smith. I've dug at his estate in central New York. He was very well known at this time as an abolitionist, as a radical reformer. He was religiously motivated, had experienced his conversion in the 1820s, becomes active in the Presbyterian Church, and then starts his own church. He is not only a reformer, but he becomes a major player both in New York State and in the nation as a whole in the abolitionist movement, in part because he's very wealthy. He is somebody who can use his vast wealth to fund a lot of reform causes. And in fact, in 1846, on the heels of this debate in the Constitutional Convention of 1846 about Black male suffrage, he decides that he's going to push this issue and take some steps on his own to make a difference on this question by giving away land to Black New Yorkers as a way, in part, and we'll talk about the goals in a second, to give them political power. Because the thought was that if you gave away land, that eventually that land could be worth the $250 mark. It doesn't sound like a lot, but at the time it was quite a significant amount for landowners to own, especially for small scale landowners to own at this time. So it greatly disadvantaged Black political power and Black New Yorkers from having an impact on their political reality and on the political questions of the day. And so Gerrit Smith, this individual here, gave away a staggering 120,000 acres of land to 3,000 Black New Yorkers. So if you do the math really quickly, that turns out to be 40 acres per individual who became a part of this land gift. He had acquired a lot of his land. He was one of the biggest landowners in New York State at the time. He had acquired his land mostly from his father, Peter Smith, who had been active in the fur trade over the previous half century. He had been partnering with John Jacob Astor and had a lot of business relationships with the Oneida, which put him into a position to acquire a lot of land, some of which became subject to land claims more recently. And so Gerrit Smith is this very wealthy individual who is a radical reformer who endeavors to put his money where his mouth is and to make a really significant change on the political reality of thousands of Black New Yorkers by giving away this land. As part of this effort, he is partnering with some of the leading activists of the day, including the men that you're seeing here. These are just some of the many individuals who helped Garrett Smith launch this amazing gift. You can imagine that the task of identifying and coordinating 3,000 gifts of land, right, is a staggering task. And in fact, in his announcement about the gift, he gave his partners, these three gentlemen here, about a month to get those names together. And then he said that it would take about a month for him to write out the deeds. You're seeing in these pictures here, Reverend Theodore Wright, who was a well-known religious leader in New York City. He was one of the first pastors of a Presbyterian church, the first Presbyterian church that broke off to serve African Americans in New York City. Dr. James McCune Smith was also New York City based. He was born in New York City to an enslaved woman. He himself became free in 1827, which is when slavery ends in New York State. So if you put ourselves in the timeline here of 1846, we're only about 20 years past the end of slavery in New York. James McCune Smith is educated. He goes to the African Free School, a well-known school in New York City for students of color in the city. And he eventually goes abroad to go to medical school. He goes to the University of Glasgow and becomes the first African-American medical doctor. He was a physician. He had his office and pharmacy in New York City, but he's also a well-known activist. He writes actively against flawed biological treatises about race. He's very active in terms of all of the movements of the day, in terms of abolition, and also in terms of ensuring justice and equality for free Black New Yorkers, including as part of this land gift. And then, of course, Frederick Douglass, who is also of New York at this time. He starts the North Star newspaper. He is obviously, if you know a little bit of his story, he had been enslaved in Maryland, eventually finds himself in Massachusetts, and where he is working closely with the abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison. And then he comes to New York in the 1840s to establish his newspaper, the North Star, and becomes a huge influential leader at this time. He is also very close friends with Garrett Smith, who gives him a lot of financial support for his newspaper. And so Theodore Wright, James McCune Smith, Frederick Douglass, and other activists are tasked with the daunting task of finding 3,000 individuals to give this land to. And so they divide up the state, and they are actively trying to find people who would be appropriate for this effort. So if we're in 1846 and you think about Lyman Epps arriving in Troy at this time, he would have been in Troy just as there's this momentous kind of bad news about the Constitutional Convention not going well for Black male suffrage, but also at the same time that there's amazing news about this amazing gift that Garrett Smith is offering. And as a parishioner in the Liberty Street Presbyterian Church, and as somebody who would have been active in the Troy community, it's no doubt in my mind that Lyman Epps would have been hearing about this gift. The Liberty Street Presbyterian Church, the main pastor at Liberty Street Presbyterian Church, was a preacher named Henry Highland Garnett, who was also a leader um, of this cause and also a partner to Garrett Smith. And he was one of the ones really advocating for this gift for people to take advantage of it. And so Lyman Epps would have heard about this gift and would have been hearing kind of the hype about it and the goals behind it and the encouragement amongst his colleagues who were partnering with Garrett Smith to make this something happen. You can hear in the rhetoric that they're using to encourage people to be a part of this land gift that there's different motivations that they're using to get people on board. One of them was this effort to get people to see agrarianism or farm life as the most ideal kind of lifestyle that had the most promise for free Black people at this time, that this was a chance for them to change their life by getting this land and becoming farmers to control their own destiny. And so you see this quote on the board, which you would have heard during one of the Black National Conventions that happens in Troy, where you have major Black leaders from across the country, not just New York State, are meeting in Troy in 1847. And amongst other things, they're talking about this gift and talking about the ways to best uplift free Black peoples and best give people economic, political, and social opportunity. And so you see in the rhetoric here this quote where one of the speakers is saying, an agricultural life is productive of moral, mental, and physical culture. The farmer levels the forest, shatters and cleaves the rock asunder, and tills the soil, which God's own hand have made. And when he climbs the mountain, even to the clouds, or enters the forest, or surveys the plain, when his eye glances upon the waving grass and grain, upon the thrifty corn, he sees the order, the variety, the beauty amid the wonders of nature, and must be led to look from nature up to nature's God, to love and admire the wisdom, the goodness, and the power of God, as though displayed, and be made a better man. So you see these kind of celebratory speeches advocating for farm life. And so Epps would have been hearing this. He also would have been sitting likely in the audience if he attended this convention, or in the pews at the Liberty Street Presbyterian Church, or reading the Black newspapers at the time. And he would have heard other messages like the gratitude that was expressed to Garrett Smith at this time. Here's just one of the many quotes. And we believe that the destiny of our people now hangs upon the use to be made of this gift by those to whom it is given, as much as upon any one thing that presents itself to our consideration. That if this land shall be settled and improved, and the wilderness made to bud and blossom as the rose, as bud and blossom it may by its now present owners, that they will work for themselves a character and create an influence that shall command the respect for themselves and their brethren of those who now very little respect us. And that will stop the mouths of those who speak slightly of us, and will exert an influence upon our brethren who have not shared in those gifts, to turn their attention to and engage in the pursuit of agricultural life. You can see in this rhetoric that it's very much putting a lot of weight on this land gift to change the course of history here, really, that by giving this gift and by people being a part of this experiment, this grand experiment where 3,000 people are going to take possession of all this land, they're going to show other people that they're capable of doing this, and that they can be as respectable and as productive and as, you know, as I want to say American, right? That they can be like everybody else, right? And that this gift is going to be the tool that allows them to make a difference, to gain the respect of others who do not respect them at this time. Right? So you're hearing again this kind of celebration. This is a picture of Henry Highland Garnett. Sorry again that the type is not showing up here. So this was Reverend Henry Highland Garnett, who was the pastor at the Liberty Street Presbyterian Church. He was, again, one of the celebrants of this effort, and talked about it in a sermon that he gave on the eve of a group of grantees who were on their way to go take possession of their land. He made this quote: "Take with you the spirit of freedom, plant the tree of liberty upon the mountain plains, that it may spread its branches far and wide." And he's seeing this gift as a way to get freedom. Garrett Smith himself talks about the goals here of this effort, and he says, quote, "In the development of your dignity and capabilities, the slaveholder would, awestruck, behold what manhood, what dignity, what capabilities he had been trampling on in the persons of his slaves. His slave-holding heart would now die within him. The rod of the oppressor would fall from his relaxed grasp, and the oppressed would go free." Right? So not only would this land gift give power and economic, political, and social power to free Black New Yorkers, but this effort would lead pro-slavery Southerners, slave owners, to be so impressed by the achievements of the grantees that they would be convinced to let slavery go. At other opportunities, Lyman Epps would have heard in speeches, including accompanied in this printed broadside that he delivers to the recipients of his land grants. You have Reverend Wright, James McKeon Smith, and Frederick Douglass writing themselves to the grantees and giving advice. And the advice that they give to the grantees would be, one, they wanted you not to just take the deed to the land, but they wanted you to go and clear and cultivate the land. And they not only wanted you to do that on your own, but they wanted to have you do it in clusters, which is interesting. And that's going to come into play in a minute when we talk about how the settlement plays out. So they're emphasizing the need to come together as grantees and work together. They also give advice about pooling your resources. They say very clearly in this letter to the grantees themselves, saying, you know, you're going to need money to save before you even go up to the land and to start this big change and to change your life. You're going to need resources. And so they say, you should be starting now to think about saving your money. We estimate that you'll need to save about $100 to be able to buy a horse or an oxen, to buy some tools, to, again, to get what you need at minimum to do what you needed to clear and cultivate your land. And they do very specifically say that you should go together with a group of other grantees and pool those resources so that if each of you had $100, that you could together put together what you would need, right? So one of you could get an oxen, one of you could get a horse, et cetera, and then you could use those resources together. At the end of this essay, they talk about the need for the grantees to combine these two kind of ideas, and that's self-reliance and mutual reliance. So combining both kind of individualism and this notion of communal effort. I think you kind of have a sense of what self-reliance is, and I'm going to quote directly from this this letter that the the organizers are putting out in terms of advice. Self-reliance must be sedulously practiced by us. Too many of us have been led by a false education to trust too little upon ourselves, too entirely upon our oppressors, taught by a cruel system to regard our own faculties as inferior. We have relied on our oppressors to form our opinions, cut our clothing, make our boots, and to keep our money for us. The last named trust having been in too many instances performed with literal accuracy. Our children are almost made to lisp that a colored man cannot do anything of himself. Hence, if we would build a church, establish a school, or publish newspapers, we must go a begging our oppressors to help us in these matters. So they go on to say that in you, there is in you the same physical and intellectual power which other men have. Exert this power. Do for yourselves what other men have done for themselves. Do this, and in 5 or 6 years hence, when your land shall be almost entirely cleared, when your fields shall teem with a ripe and mellow harvest, when your house and your barn shall stand cozily by the roadside, when your church shall modestly rear itself in the distance, when your wives and children shall cluster around your hearth in the robust health of a country life, then will you, with calm and honest pride, survey the glad scene, filled with the glowing consciousness that your own free labor, right, your own individual effort, and careful forethought have wrought out this good work. Right? But then they shift gears to talk about mutual reliance. They say mutual reliance must accompany self-reliance. By this, we do not mean that you should rely upon one another more than you do upon other men, but that you shall rely upon one another as much as you rely upon other men. Unfortunately, we have been too frequently brought up to mistrust one another. There are amongst us too many who refuse to trust a colored man because of his color. Having never seen each other filling certain responsible situations, we conclude that we are not fit to fill them. And when an earnest soul winds its way through the requirements that fit it for eminent position of all men, the brethren of that man are the first to pull him down and crucify him. Away with this false, mistrustful spirit born of slavery. Away with mutual distrust. Let us, regardless of complexion, trust one another. Right? So it's this combination of you work hard, but you also need to work together with your other neighbors, the other grantees that are coming with you to make this a reality. So Lyman Epps would have been hearing all of this rhetoric, this advice, this, these ideas about this gift being such a game changer in terms of history. And he decides to be one of those men, and him and his family to go up and take possession of the land. The 120,000 acres of land is largely in Franklin and Essex counties. That's what's pictured here in yellow and red. And we know that this land was not easy land to cultivate. This was a challenging environment, a mountainous region, as you all likely know if you know the Adirondacks. But Lyman Epps and some of his neighbors end up making a go of it. And about the estimates have it that about 200 individuals decide to make a go of it in the Adirondack Mountains as part of this experiment. Now, this is far shy of the 3,000 that the organizers hope to be a part of this experiment. But nevertheless, it's a go. And a couple of different settlements spring up. One of them becomes nicknamed Timbuctoo, and that's been the focus of the work that I've been doing, is this little settlement that's in North Elba, New York, Lake Placid is the village in the town of North Elba, just situated in Essex County. Lyman Epps is one of the individuals who's given land in North Elba at this time. This is a map of North Elba, and this gives you a sense of the land that was given away. And hopefully you can see on your screen the light pink shaded boxes. Just to give you a sense of the scale of the experiment, the scale of the land gifts, the lightly shaded pink boxes are all lands that were given away by Garrett Smith. Those aren't lands that were actually occupied by grantees. We know from the archival record that the parcels that are in dark red, they're the bright tomato red, are the parcels that were actually occupied at one point. So it gives you a sense of, I always look at this and I think, oh my God, if they had actually been able to execute the vision as they had thought this experiment was going to play out, this would have radically changed the demographics of land ownership in this region. If you think about how much of this land was Black owned at the time, if all of these individuals had come up to North Elba at this time, it would have radically changed. I think it would have changed the outcome of this experiment as well. Lyman Epps was given the southwest corner of lot 84, which was a remote wooded lot. It's one of the red boxes at the center in the box at the center. That's been the focus of my work. Lyman Epps and his family, his wife Anna, his daughter and son, who was born in Troy, and then they go on to have several more children now that they're in North Elba, beginning in 1849, which is when we know that they arrived during the summer of 1849. We know that some of the individuals that they came up with, kind of speaking to this push to mutual reliance, speaking to this push to work together, that even though not a lot of grantees came, we know that those that did come, especially in the cluster, in Lyman Epps's cluster at the center of this map, did come from Troy. And so I've done some research on the folks who came from Troy and where they were living in Troy at the time. And I mapped it out a bit to give you an idea of where they were and the likelihood of them knowing each other. And so all of these folks with the yellow stars this is a map of Troy, of downtown Troy, not too far away from the Hudson River. You can see all of these individuals who were a part of this land experiment, including Lyman Epps on the far left there, who lived, according to the city directories, on Liberty Street, so only a few blocks down from the Liberty Street Presbyterian Church. He was not that far away from James Henderson, who was another grantee who came up to North Elba. And also the Jefferson brothers, they didn't live that far, again, not far from the Liberty Street Presbyterian Church, not far from William Appo, who's another Black man who's originally from Philadelphia, who's a musician who actually buys land to be a part of the experiment up in North Elba. And then I also put Henry Highland Garnett's residence there so that you can just get a sense of the likelihood that these gentlemen and their families knew each other is really high, right? And so they were a part of this together, and they go up to North Elba together, and they end up settling some of their parcels there at the center of North Elba, some of which are in close proximity to each other. including Lyman Epps's parcel in the deep woods about 2 miles off the of Bear Cub Road, not too far from the John Brown Farm State Historic Site. In terms of partners in crime, so to speak, for this experiment, we know that John Brown also was a part of this. He doesn't live that far away from the Epps family. The Eppses were actually very close to John Brown and his family. You can see the farmhouse that's at the State Historic Site in North Elba right there in the lower left-hand picture. John Brown is buried in North Elba. He is executed by the U.S. government after his raid on Harper's Ferry in 1859. He leaves behind his wife and several children. This is Mary Brown and two of their daughters. She was living in North Elba at this time throughout the 1850s when John Brown, who had come to North Elba to support the settlers who were a part of this experiment, and specifically those that were a part of the Timbuctoo settlement, as he realizes that not as many grantees are coming up to the Adirondacks, he becomes distracted by other abolitionist efforts, including the fight over slavery in the Kansas Territory, and then eventually his effort to relating to the raid on Harper's Ferry in 1859. And so in John Brown's absence throughout the 1850s, the Epps family is one of the families who were present in North Elba, who I think really supported the Brown family in given that John was absent so much. And so the Epps family were a support system for the Brown family members who were left behind, and they were very close. Lyman Epps and his family end up singing at John Brown's funeral. And if you go into the attic of the John Brown farmhouse, you can see Lyman Epps's name in the rafters. And I suspect that means that he helped John Brown's son-in-law, Henry Thompson, build their house there. And that's how close that they were. When we think about how Timbuctoo is remembered, John Brown is part of the reason why it earns notice in the history books because of its association with John Brown. So you do see historians in the 19th century and in the early 20th century talking about Timbuktu in part because of its association with him. And we also see historians writing about the Timbuktu settlement in dismissive terms. And you see, until recently, especially relating to Amy Godine's amazing recent text called The Black Woods, which is the history book on this settlement and on this land grant. Only until recently, as a result in part with Amy's work, historians have been rather dismissive of this settlement, in part because not as many people end up coming to the Adirondacks as had been intended. That made people characterize this experiment as a failure. And so people still talk about it as something that failed. And that's always been something that's been, it hasn't sat well with me because I think about people like the Eppses who were a family that came up to this region and radically changed their lives and lived in North Elba for generations. I think to myself, well, how can we consider it a failure when you have some families, Lyman Eppses being one of them, being a part of this experiment and living the vision of what this was meant to be? Again, I'm so sorry that it's not opening in PowerPoint, which has all the writing on these slides. So I'm going to do my best to fill in the blanks here. So given this historical legacy relating to the narrative relating to it being a failure, the narrative relating it to John Brown, many moons ago in 2009, when I came up to the North Country, this was something that I, thought about how archaeology might be helpful here in telling this story in new ways and giving us new threads to weave into this tapestry of this historical narrative of the Adirondacks and this historical narrative of what the Timbuctoo settlement and the larger land grant was all about. And so the project goals for the archaeology of Timbuctoo are, there's many different goals that I've had for this project. One is to just locate sites that are connected to the experiment. That's been a lot harder. Those of you who have seen the documentary know that that's been a hard goal for me. And once those sites are found, the goal has been to document what everyday life has been like for the people who were a part of this settlement. On top of that, the goal for the Timbuctoo Archaeology Project has been to collaborate with community stakeholders, people who have a personal interest in this story, people who are related to historical figures linked to this special community. The goal for the project has also been to train archaeology students. I'm a professor at SUNY Potsdam, and the field work that we do as part of the Timbuctoo Archaeology Project is also about giving the next generation of archaeologists hands-on experience in how to do archaeology. And then lastly, to engage with the public, to be able to bring the public to our field sites and to help tell the story of these settlers and the grantees using the archaeology. The history of the field schools at Timbuctoo has been ongoing. I've been working on this project since 2009. In 2009, 2011, and 2013, we dug on land that was deeded to the Epps family, so the southwest quarter of Lot 84. So in 2009, 2011, and 2013, we worked in the deep woods. And that's what the documentary is kind of talking about, the efforts there to try and find the Epps homestead. Unfortunately, we were not successful. We found other things associated, including this toy horse associated with the later owner of the property. And so after 2013, I shifted gears and started to broaden what I viewed as a Timbuctoo site and started to kind of broaden our idea of what the Timbuctoo community could be. And so began testing at sites that were associated with people who were in the Timbuctoo network, including the Brown family. So the central image of the sewing scissors that we found in 2017 came from the John Brown farm. And so we had about a dozen students working there in 2013, including with the great-great-granddaughter of John Brown himself, Alex Kesey Mequoy. That was pretty special and documented what life was like at the farm. And then more recently in 2022 and 2024, we have been digging at a place called Heaven Hill Farm. It's also called the Hinckley Holt Newman Farm. At least that's what we've been talking about when you talk about the previous owners of the site. And that's going to be what I'm talking about for the rest of our time together, is the recent work that we've been doing at Heaven Hill. This is a picture of the historic farmstead at Heaven Hill. It is the oldest, supposedly the oldest standing structure in North Elba, still standing today. It's been heavily modified, but what you're seeing here is this historic homestead. It's got quite the view. It's a beautiful place to do field work for 4 weeks over the summer, and the students have been really enjoying the work that we've been doing here. I chose to do field work at Heaven Hill because of the associations that this farm has with the Epps family. The Eppses actually end up moving off of their original Timbuctoo lot and move across the street from the Hinckley Holt Newman farm in the 1860s. And they end up being employed at this farm. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. But they would have known the owners of this farm, the Hinckley family, the Holt family, and then eventually Anna Newman, who's the woman who ends up employing Epps family members at this as part of the farm labor that she needed on this very sizable parcel. It was about 1,000 acres of land that was a part of this farm. And so Heaven Hill Farm became a really important employer of North Elba residents. Before Anna Newman takes control of this farm, we know a little bit about the other families, including the Hinkleys and the Holts. We know most about the Hinkleys, including Horatio, who's pictured in the upper right. You could see the picture in the middle there is actually of the historic home before it was renovated. So you can see some hints of the modern image that you're seeing of the house in the prior picture there. Horatio and Amanda Hinckley moved to North Elba. They buy 640 acres from Garrett Smith. So he owns this land as well. He buys it. They buy it in 1846. They're originally from Lewis, New York. They have 4 children, and included amongst them are Alexis, their son, and Abigail, their daughter. The woman on the left is Abigail Hinckley. It's a later picture of their daughter, Abigail. We feel confident that the Hinkleys would have known the Eppses because the Hinkleys were close with the Browns. Abigail actually marries Salmon Brown, who had been injured in Kansas and doesn't end up going to Harper's Ferry. And so they actually were married. So the Hinckley and the Brown family get joined together through marriage. They were married in the Heaven Hill farmstead here in the living room. And so this farmstead has associations with the Brown family. We know that Alexis, the son, Abigail's brother, was an abolitionist. He's touted as an Underground Railroad supporter. He ends up serving in the Civil War and returns to the area and actually buys the John Brown farm from Mary Brown, kind of like the in-laws becoming the caretakers of the property. And so you can see this Hinckley family is very close with the Brown family. And so it's likely that they would have had similar political sensibilities and would have likely known the Eppses as well. We know that Anna Newman, who's pictured here, who takes possession of the farm in the 1870s, her time at Heaven Hill Farm goes from 1876 to 1915. And she actually buys this parcel, and she has a really interesting story herself. She was the daughter of a very wealthy Philadelphia family. She had been coming up to the Adirondacks to holiday, but she decides in 1876 to eschew her Philadelphia elite lifestyle, and she buys this farm in North Elba and decides to run it on her own as a single woman. And so she has this really interesting story. Her legacy is complicated in that in her obituary and some of the newspaper articles, she's talked about as eccentric, as peculiar, as unique. One of the headlines of the time says that Anna Newman was the Adirondacks' strangest woman. And you can imagine how this is filtered through 19th century gender norms, right, of what would have been normally expected of a young woman at this time. It certainly wouldn't have been expected that a rich young lady would not marry and would instead go off to the mountains and farm this large parcel. And so she ends up really putting her stamp on the community of North Elba, in part through her farm. You know, she becomes the leading employer of farm labor in the community. The average North Elba farmer paid out about $62 in terms of farm labor, according to the agricultural censuses. But Newman pays out in on average over $1,000 to farm laborers in the community. And so hired help would have been needed for cooking, for milking her cows, for working during the planting and harvest. And sugaring seasons, there was a sizable, and still is a sizable, maple tree farm there as well. People would have been paid for providing goods and services. We have those in the household records. We have records of local families baking bread for Newman each week, and working on this farm. She also was known for her leadership in this church that was called the White Church, not because it was racially segregated, but because of the color of the church. And there's a drawing there on the right. This was a Methodist and Baptist church that was an early church in the community, and she was an important patron at the White Church. And it just so happens that the Epps family were also important leaders in this church, and so they would have known each other as being of like mind, of a similar religious sensibility at this time. And so it's not surprising that Anna Newman employs Epps family members, and that this would have been somebody who had an economic relationship with the Eppses, and also had, kind of the spiritual community that they shared together. And so, digging at Heaven Hill Farm allowed us to broaden our sense of what Timbuctoo involved, and thinking about how the farms themselves wouldn't have been enough for the grantees, and that the grantees would have also had to do farm labor for others in order to make enough of a living to make it work for them. So in 2022 and in 2024, we walked in the footsteps of the Eppses at Heaven Hill Farm. And the first things that we do as part of the archaeological excavation is to map out the site using all kinds of tools, ranging from compasses. You can see the students practicing with those compasses on the right, or higher tech equipment such as the total station on the left. That allows us to grid out the whole landscape so that we can know where everything is. And then you see our students doing some digging, some testing to be able to find locations of interest. And so people always ask, well, how do you know where to dig? Well, what you're seeing the students do here is a part of that. And so as part of the search for locations that would give us some artifacts that would help us understand what life was like on this farm, we have the students dig small holes. That's what you're seeing on the left, to look at the soil changes, to potentially find artifacts. And you're also seeing some students doing metal detecting. We systematically do shovel test pits every 10 and 5 meters across the site. And then we also are doing metal detecting systematically across the site to find areas, clusters of potential hits that we could then investigate through a larger excavation unit. We were also just walking across the site, which is what you're seeing the students do there on the right. They're in an area that we had known from 2022 had been very productive. And so we had them clear the land there to get the bushes and the leaves from plants, to clear those away a little bit so that we can see if there are artifacts on the surface. And everywhere where you're seeing pink flagging tape in this image on the left, you're seeing a surface scatter of artifacts, and this is to the rear of the farmhouse. And so using the shovel test pit data, using the metal detector data, using the results of just walking over the site, we put in our units, our excavation units, strung them up, and started the full excavation. You see here, I'm sorry again that the full picture is not here, weirdly. You're seeing areas of the site and those historic photographs that we tested. You're seeing the front of the farmhouse on top, and then you're seeing the back of the farmstead on the bottom there. And so we dug primarily to the rear of the farmstead in areas that were wooded, and would have been more likely where they would have been discarding material. I always say that in the 19th century, they didn't have garbage trucks that came and did curbside pickups. So they had to figure out other ways of disposing their trash. And so we were on the hunt for these, what we call a midden, and we definitely found that to the rear of the house. So you can see some of the unit excavations that were going on. You could see that we're not that deep in the soil before you're seeing some interesting things coming out. This is on a rise in the property to the rear of the farmstead, and we're finding lots of building materials. We're finding a lot of stones that I suspect were piled there as part of field clearing. And we're finding lots of evidence of everyday life. And these are just some of the examples here. One of the bread and butter objects that we find archaeologically are ceramics. Ceramics are tools that would have been used in the home to make food, to prepare food, to store food, and to serve food. And you're seeing examples of all of those things here pictured. You've got more the plate that you're seeing that's marked in the upper left corner is likely something that they would have eaten off of. The bowl that Leilani is holding in the middle picture is likely something that would have been used as a service vessel on the table in the kitchen. And then the fragments that you're seeing on the lower left, the yellowware bowl with the stripes, and the gray salt glazed stoneware crock that's on the right, those are more likely to be used in the kitchen. We found massive amounts of yellowware mixing bowl fragments, which is what you're seeing there. So clearly a lot of food preparation was happening at this farm. And then what's showing with the salt glazed stoneware crock, I call that 19th century Tupperware. It was a storage vehicle for dry goods and liquids. It also could have been used for pickling. And so it's very clear that Anna Newman's household was catering to food production and food storage, and not necessarily like fancy dinner parties. We also found bottle glass and vessel glass. This is some of the bottle glass. You can see we found a good amount of medicine bottles, speaking to Newman's interest in health and well-being. We know that she was a bit of a stubborn woman. She actually ends up dying in 1915 from a broken leg that became infected because she refused to see the doctor. And so she's likely caring for herself with some of the more commonly available commercial medications that you're seeing. On the left, there is a bitters bottle, and on the right, there is another common medicine. Other vessels that we are finding in the middle there, it's a little bit hard to see, but those are fragments of mason jars. So it's clear that food canning, household canning was going on with some of the produce that was being produced at this farm. Other small finds that we were finding, you can see Sydney there holding this metal object in front of her face. That's actually a curry comb for horses. Anna Newman was known for her love of horses. She had a lot of horses that she was really proud of. And so it's not surprising that we're seeing evidence of farm life here, not just food production and consumption, but also the working part of the farm. The thing in the middle there was something that was really cool to find. As it came up, it became clear that it was part of this strapping system that was likely from some small chest that could be locked. So the chest itself was likely made of wood or leather, but the strapping remained, and we did not find the key though, but the straps themselves, it was likely a way to hold valuables or tools that would have been special. And then this was a really cool find that we made in the lab after we brushed it off. This was a button. We find lots of buttons at archaeological sites, which is always exciting. But this one, when we were in the lab and brushed it off, we noticed that it's actually a military button. And so, speaking to the military service of somebody who likely worked on the property or boarded on the property, we know that Anna Newman had people living with her who worked on the farm. We also found evidence of diet. You see large long bones from domesticated mammals, such as the one on the left. You can see evidence of butchering in that bone that we found. It's likely cow. You can see JJ in the middle there holding what looks to be a pig molar. And then on the tray that Anna is working with on the right there, you can see a bone that we think is likely deer bone. So it's interesting to think of Anna Newman's household as relying not just on domesticated animals, but also some of the wild animals that would have been in the Adirondacks at the time. We also focused on an area right behind the backside of the house that we had tested in 2022. In 2022, we had found evidence of a water pipe system that Anna Newman had put in place to make it easier for her to get water to the house. There was a number of spring houses on the hillside overlooking her house, and she paid a lot of money to run this pipe system. And so on the very last day in the field, which is always how it works, we came up on what you're seeing on the right there is another water pipe running under a pipe that we had already observed in 2022. So you can see that this is a kind of orangey red material. It's likely cedar. This is a better picture of this pipe system. So you can see in a more shallow level, you can see this water pipe that was actually made of metal that was wrapped around wooden staves, kind of like a barrel would be made to make this pipe, and then wrapped with metal. And the water pipe that's below it, that the cedar wood that you're seeing below, seems to be it was an earlier version of this water pipe system that they use that does not have the wire wrapping around the wood. But it's amazing to see that the wood still preserved there. So that was really exciting for the students. I couple this image of the water pipe with the image of the backside of the Newman farmstead. And you can kind of see in this picture, which is such a wonderful picture, we never get to see the backside of these pictures of pictures of the backsides of houses. And so we're happy to have this image because it's actually showing a water pump there at the center. You can see this long wood, column there with a water pump at the top. And so we actually think that we are digging right near this water pipe that is being showed near the water pump. And so it would have been this working area to the rear of the house, right outside the kitchen addition. In addition to the archaeological evidence that we're finding, we did a huge amount of outreach as part of the field school in 2024. We worked with third graders from Keene who had been studying Timbuctoo and got a chance to do a little mock excavation that we created in an area that had already been dug. And we put some fun artifacts in there, and they didn't know it was not real, but they had a great time. We also hosted teenagers from around the region who were homeschooled. We had students come and look at the artifacts that we found. So lots of opportunities for outreach to get students excited about history, to know the Timbuctoo story, and to know about the Epps family and those who were in the orbit of the Eppses in the larger Timbuctoo community. This is a tour that was a part of the field school where a bunch of librarians and museum folks came out to see what we're doing. And so they got to tour the excavation. We also had outreach from friends from a nonprofit in Ithaca that was related to diversifying farming and thinking about more inclusive farming practices, getting people of color involved in farming and in land back movements. And so folks from this learning farm in Ithaca came and toured our site and went to see the original Epps site. Unfortunately, those are blank pictures. That's no fun. Okay. But to kind of wrap things up in terms of the takeaways about what we've learned from the project, I would summarize in terms of what we continue to do and what we continue to learn in 2024 is just giving more insight to the survival strategies of the Timbuctoo grantees, like the Eppses, the fact that they were not only farming on their own land of 80 acres at this time, and they kept their Timbuctoo farm, they harvested the timber resources from their original Timbuctoo lot. So they had different parcels. But in addition to this, they're also working at other people's farms. And so giving a window on that experience is pretty powerful. I think other takeaways is, I think, when I think about the Timbuctoo community and I think about how the Timbuctoo settlement evolved, as some of the grantees move away, but the Eppses stay behind, this broader Timbuctoo community of the Brown family, of the Hinkleys, of others in this community that would have been in their orbit, that kind of biracial community becomes the community that the Eppses would have had to rely on for that mutual reliance, that that the original organizers of this project emphasized, right? Self-reliance and mutual reliance. So I think that mutual reliance takes a new appearance as the Timbuctoo settlement evolves, but it's still an important ingredient to the success of the Epps family. I would also say a takeaway for the project is how powerful archaeology can be as a vehicle for outreach and collaboration. It's just a wonderful way to get people and thinking about the power of place and the tangibility of the history that we are documenting through archaeology. It's a great way to help people bring this history to life. And to work together to get different stakeholders involved in the project to really see it as this shared work that we're doing. I would also lastly say that archaeology is this powerful vehicle for conversations about how history is written. And this might take us full circle back to the beginning of the conversation where I was asking questions about, how do we view our own history? Whose history is our history? And how do we tell the history of the Adirondacks or of America? With archaeological research, we can sometimes fill in the blanks to create a richer tapestry, a more complete tapestry. And what does that make us think about the narratives that have already been written about our history? And then I would just say thank you to all. That's what this slide would have said. Thank you to the Chapman Museum, to all of you. Thank you for taking time out of your evening to learn more about what we've been doing as part of this project. And I want to thank again the Chapman Museum and their staff for inviting me, and all of their supporters for supporting this important program. I also want to thank the Eline Foundation, which gave us permission to dig at Heaven Hill Farm. John Brown Lives, which is a nonprofit that supports a lot of the outreach work that we do as part of the archaeology. SUNY Potsdam and some of their funding resources that allow for the field school to be to happen and supported and to minimize the cost to our students. And to thank all of the outreach participants who were so eager to get involved in the work that we did this past summer in 2024. So I will leave it at that, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Hadley. That was amazing. Great update on all that's happening at the site. If you did have a question, feel free to, we have a little clap going on. If you do have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. I'll read it aloud. Cindy asks, what did the yellow colored squares on the map represent? I think
yes,
that slide.
So I don't know if I will look at it on here. The yellow were, I was trying to figure out, one of the hardest parts of this project is figuring out who came and who didn't come. We are relying on census data often and tax records I've started to use to help us figure these things out. And the censuses are only good on the 5-year, right? The state censuses come out on the 5-year and the federal censuses come out on the 10-year. But some people are coming in between those intervals. And so it's harder for us to track who comes for a shorter interval than 5 years. And so that map is trying to figure out, okay, can I say that we know that they didn't come? And so the yellow ones are ones where we know for sure that they didn't come.
Okay, very cool. Doris didn't have a question, but she just wanted to say very interesting presentation, so she appreciates that.
Thanks, Doris.
If anyone else has a question and typing is going to take you too long, feel free to unmute yourself and ask it in person. That's fine too.
And if you don't have questions, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you think about what the power of telling these stories? What is the power of telling these stories? How does it affect how we see ourselves or American history? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and to have a conversation about what impact you think this kind of new narrative might have on our understanding of the Adirondacks or whatever. Or you can continue asking me questions. I don't mean to give you an assignment. I can also say that we do have future plans to hopefully revisit some of the original sites associated with the Epps family and some of the others in that cluster. And so, stay tuned for that. There's a lot of things in the works and that I can't really announce yet, but we're hoping to get some funding to help us revisit some of the sites that we looked at quite early on in this project. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to use some new technology to get us some of the data that we were looking for early on.
Very cool. Joanne asks, what housing was provided during your field studies during the summers?
Yeah, so it depends. I've tried different things over the years. In 2009, I had half of my crew camping and half of my crew in a hostel. And it was like the rainiest summer ever. And the people who camped hated me. They named the river of water that ended up under their tent after me because I wasn't staying out there with them. And so I said, maybe we won't camp after that. And so we moved to more of a hostel model. But we've also stayed in the North Country Community College dorms in Saranac Lake. We've stayed at rentals in Lake Placid. That's one of the challenges of doing this work is that it happens over the summer during tourism season, and that causes expenses to go up. And so trying to find rentals and get some financial support through grants has been really important to me so that the students don't bear the burden for having to pay too much for housing.
Very cool. Donna asks, how does one find out where the digs are and can anyone view the sites?
Yeah, so usually what I would probably recommend is that you can find us on social media. The Department of Anthropology at SUNY Potsdam has an active presence on Facebook and on Instagram, and we do make announcements about what's happening with our field work. And as part of our field work, you can see that outreach is really important to us. It's important to us because this isn't my thing. It's everybody's. And it's important for us to make sure that people can learn about it and become, aware of what's going on. And so as part of that, we do open houses. And so there's usually at least one public day where we open up tours. It depends on the project. So when we were digging at the John Brown Farm State Historic Site, it was open to the public. So we got lots of visitors during that field season. And we find it an amazing way for students to get the opportunity to talk about the work that they're doing so they can really hone their communication skills about how to talk about what they're doing to a general audience. Because, students at first start using lots of jargon, and then after being corrected, they have to learn how to talk in an accessible way, and so those kinds of experiences are really important. So we usually make it really well known that those open houses are happening. So happy to keep you aware of that. I'm also happy to get you on a list if you want to share your email, and I'm happy to let you know if that's of interest.
Very cool. All right. Donna, a different Donna, had a comment. She says, I'm involved in a community archaeology program in the Capital District. It's
Awesome.
engaging to learn about how differently those before us lived and how the cultures that came to our area connected or were in conflict. It's a joy when we do outreach to see young people get interested, whether it be archaeology or the history.
I agree, Donna. I am on board. There's nothing better than like seeing kids be excited about their history. It kills me when kids are not excited about history. Even my own children, they go and they say, "I don't like history, Mom," and I'm like, "No." It's really about how you present that history and how you tell the stories. And archaeology is such a powerful way of making that history come to life. So I totally hear you. And I think it's really important, especially now more than ever, for us to have a better appreciation for where we've been so that we know how we've gotten to where we are, and to think about some of the processes that we're still working on. That in the 19th century they were working on who is an Adirondacker and who's an American, and we're still working on these as you see from these news stories and from the media. We're still figuring out that stuff and how to live together despite differences.
I agree 1000%. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you again, Hadley, for agreeing to
Yeah,
come back and present with us. We always love when we can have you. And maybe we'll
happy to
see you
be
again in
here.
the future. We'll see.
I know. I hope that there's more to discover, and
Yeah.
always more to discover, but hopefully more to share. And so happy to keep the Chapman Museum as part of it in the loop.
Yes. Well, we appreciate it. Oh, Joanne just commented, I volunteer with Skidmore College Field
Oh,
Schools
great.
and enjoy
Yeah,
interacting with the students.
awesome. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. We love our volunteers, and I love connecting. So that's awesome.
Wonderful. All right. Well, everyone who joined us tonight, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Um, we hope to see you again at a future Conversations with the Past. And have a great evening, and we hope to see you again, like I said.